And so again, how do we tell that particular story that's very valuable to that audience? And how do you tell it in their language? And I think this kind of goes through that whole threaded conversation that we've had, which is how do we use brand marketing and co-marketing with other logos to help tell that story in languages that we don't quite yet have the right to win? How do we really lean in on that brand promise and that cachet that the strong brand of our organization and our company holds? How do we ensure that we have that threaded conversation through all of our just different customer touchpoint journey? If they're coming to the website or engaging within LinkedIn or attending an event or meeting with our sales team, that we have that threaded conversation and that through line of story all the way through. So I think it's really important for us to embrace the standards, or maybe the foundation. Maybe it's like marketing foundation. That never really goes away.
Hello, and welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jason, today. And our guest is Deanna Adams of Dropbox. Hey, Deanna. Thanks for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So everybody at this point has heard of Dropbox. But can you give us an overview of what you focus on in your role there as Senior Director of Integrated Campaign Marketing?
Absolutely. I kind of tell everybody I'm the alphabet soup of marketing over here. A lot of the functions that I carry are hard to encapsulate into a really nice, clean title. But really, I was brought on to think about integrated campaign and content strategy. Like, where do you sit in between product marketing, and sales, and really identify that cohesive strategy? But I also really support our field marketing motions, product marketing motions, as well as our customer marketing motions. So I think if I was to encapsulate integrated campaign, field, partner, customer marketing, that would be a lot. But if we think about the role that I do, like I said, I sit in between product marketing and sales and all of those execution pieces. My job is to think about how do we all work together as one? How do each stage of that journey that we're telling the same story, how do we make sure that we're representing brand as that beautiful touch point that really integrates with our customer at every single stage of that customer journey?
And what attracts you to a specific role? And was there something overall about the brand or story that attracted you to work there?
That's a really good question. I've worked with some very strong brands over my career, and each one of them had a really strong, human-centric component to them. And I think that's really what drives me. My job as an integrated campaign and content marketer essentially is really to talk about what we do in a very simple and human way. We have to take these very complex ideas and really translate them for people that want to hear them at the time that they want to hear it. And I say human, meaning we're more than just meeting our customers. Our customers are humans. And so we have to talk to them in their language. And so brands that really have the ability to make that touch point in that human-centric way is really important to me.
Yeah, that's good. So how do you define brand, and what role does how you think about brand show up in the way that Dropbox goes to market?
Yeah. I think that's one of the beautiful things around Dropbox. To me, brand is the promise. It's that emotional resonance to what you do in and day out. And I'm really struck by a lot of the commentary that our team gives us coming back from our in-person events. We had an amazing activation at Sundance. There was an amazing activation at SaaStr. And the people that stop us on the street and talk about how they use Dropbox and how it saved them in their own work day to day, that's amazing. So if you think about brand, that's the power of brand. They're driving that emotional connection and really delivering on that promise to the customers and how they work and how they live and how they integrate with technology every day.
And you've talked about leading multidisciplinary teams across customer marketing, field, partner marketing. What are some of the common silos that you encounter, and how do you go about breaking them down and telling a more cohesive, united story?
I think a lot of it just starts with, are we structured to solve the right problem at the right stage of the customer journey? It's really easy for those that are channel owners or very specific disciplinary owners to think about what they own and only what they owned. it's really easy to think about, oh, I'm delivering this LinkedIn ad and I'm driving traffic and I'm driving clicks and I'm driving engagement. But that's only solving for one piece. But if we're all working together towards an integrated plan across the full customer journey, the person that owns that individual channel or that LinkedIn ad, they can see the performance of what they are doing and then zoom out to see how that impacts the full integrated story. I think that's really what that power is. And so breaking down silos is really starting with like, are we all marching towards the same goal? And the analogy that I used with my team a lot is not everybody can be the forward. Not everybody can be the goalie. Not everybody can be the coach. We all have a very important role to play in this game of marketing. And we all have to work together in our own specific discipline on the same playbook for us to win the game, to win the championship, to win the whatever. And I think that's a really good way for describe like integrated marketing. Integrated marketing is that play, is that gameplay, is that playbook. And everybody has a specific role to play on the team.
I love that. And how do you go about, with that kind of like knowing your individual role, kind of still getting the benefits of sometimes being able to be like more interdisciplinary in practice?
Well, like I said, like the playbook is really where it starts. And you have to agree that at every stage of the customer journey, you're solving a very specific problem with a very specific set of tactics, with a very specific set of content, with a very specific set of measurement. And you have to think about how that works towards the entire customer journey. So let's just play one example. If the goal within the organization is to drive awareness and consideration of a new product, you are going to over-rotate on those top of funnel journey points. And so if you think about everybody's working toward that top of funnel journey points, we all need to agree that, okay, we need to identify new contacts. We need to ensure that they are aware of this new product. We need to think about the engagement within their words. And we need to measure our ability to bring them into that particular funnel. And so that's the playbook that we would then create. Within that playbook, I call what I call chapters or channels. Everybody is in charge of that specific channel. And so it's up to them to come to the table and says, I am contributing to that metric of getting into new customers by doing X, Y, and Z. And this is how I know that we're doing well. This is my benchmark and this is my measurement of improvement. And it really helps us think about the full scope. So I think about the full scope. And I also help direct or give guidance for those folks that are in those individual channels. And the magic to me, like the magic behind all of that is we can go back to this analogy of the playbook for your sports team is brand is the wrapper around all of it. It is what holds that playbook together. It is that binder, that promise. Or another analogy that I keep using is like, performance or execution or channel owners is the engine and brand is that wrapper. That's the shell that really makes it all work together. And so I think that's not only the strategy behind it or the promise behind it, but the magic around it as well is like how those two groups work together.
Yeah, that's good. So I'd say, there was a time on LinkedIn where like the most recurring type of post was people making up these like imaginary debates over what mattered most, right? Was it brand or performance? And I think that most people that actually do marketing understand it's not like a real thing you have to choose between. You don't have to choose between brand marketing and performance marketing, and you can kind of hold, those two thoughts in tandem and balance an approach to marketing where you're focused on performance, yes, but you're also focused on communicating the brand story. Like, how do you guys take that more like balanced and more nuanced approach in your campaign work?
It's one of the things that I love about marketing is it really is that intersection of art and science. And this is like a really good example of that art and science coming together. If you think about brand being the wrapper or the brand being the promise, there's a lot of art to that. How do you tell that story and really connect emotionally with those target audiences you want to reach? And the measurement may feel a little bit art as well. Obviously, we can track traffic, we can track engagement, we can track views. It's really hard to then make that leap into performance marketing that is traditionally very science driven, very linear, very A, B, C, D gets you this particular result. And there's been a lot of discussion in the market on LinkedIn and around with my peers of that chasm between is almost like the dark funnel. And it's really hard to drive attribution to those particular motions. But all of us in marketing that have been in B2B marketing know that that balance of art and science, or that middle section, is where there is not a linear attribution. But we know when brand works well because that performance marketing is so much easier. And we always feel the gap when that chasm is met, when brand is, making a changeover from their particular campaigns. We have that lull period. We can feel that within performance marketing. It's really hard for us to drive that reach and drive that contactability. And so while there is a little bit of art of like drawing that conclusion between brand and performance marketing, I think it's something that we all accept and all should accept. If like we are not going to have linear attribution for some of those motions.
And how does a high profile brand partnership come into play in this overall integrated campaign strategy? And how do you go beyond the logo, the NASCAR effect on logos for partnerships?
It's really easy to have the big showing as far as a couple of different ones. One, which is like the big brand co-marketing motions, like two big behemoth SaaS companies are coming together to co-invest in $100 million to do blah, 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 blah. Those are really hard. That is like what I used to call aligning two aircraft carriers in the South Pacific Ocean to drive towards a common goal. Because you need to make sure that you have the same fiscal calendar. You need to make sure that you have the same rhythm of how your sales teams are going together. You need to make sure that, while we're co-investing in this so many millions of dollars, that we are aligned on where our pockets of opportunity are to win. So it becomes very strategic and very tactical and very aligned to those pockets that you can drive that co-selling and co-marketing motion. The other one that I think about is, we are investing in sponsorships where there's an opportunity for high-level brands to sponsor other high-level brands. And when they work when you're able to use those partnerships to tell the story in areas that you cannot. This is where if you want to break into new audiences, new what I call ecosystems, you're essentially wanting to tell that story in their language. And if you are unable to tell a story in the language of your new audience, the best way to do it is to align with some of those larger brands. And so it becomes less of a logo swap or less of a showy brand moment, but really more about how we can drive authenticity and trust within an ecosystem around our brand. So again, going back to that emotional connection, if we do not have the right to win within that ecosystem, how do we align with a brand that does have that promise and that trust within that ecosystem? So that's really where it works.
That's cool. So I want to talk a little bit about AI. We're at a point right now where pretty much every tech company, every SaaS company has some AI integration in their product, or they're working on one. And as a result, most companies have tried to figure out, okay, how do we inject this into our brand content or brand messaging so that people understand that, we're an AI company? How do you approach an overarching brand story in a way that's compelling and credible and that also has some staying power? And on that last note, one thing I've been thinking about a ton lately is just like, and I don't think this is the case necessarily, but I remember 10 years ago, everybody was talking about cloud computing, like that was kind of the big thing, right? And it was a big deal to say like, oh, we're based in the cloud. And then kind of slowly over time, people stopped talking about that because it just became table stakes. So yeah, curious. I know that was a bit of an aside, but just kind of curious, how you're thinking about this from a brand perspective.
I loved your aside because that is the analogy that I use quite often. I've been in the marketing game long enough that I was there during the initial conversation of cloud computing, and it's very analogous as we think about it. The early conversations are all about promise and potential, and it was a little vaporware-ish. Like, we're like, what does it mean? We have this potential and this promise of cloud computing. We're right there, or we're kind of edging out of it really around AI and that potential and that promise. And again, like the conversations we had next as we moved to the cloud was really about security and control. Because it was so unknown, people then want to like hold on to it. Like, what do I have control over? Because I don't know what I don't know. And I cannot give control over to my most critical systems to something that is an unknown. Very similar to AI right now. Like, how do we protect and control it? Like, what are those boundaries? And then, as you said, like, we get to that point with both cloud computing. And I think this is where we're in that tipping point now with AI, which is like, it is table stakes. We are now in a place where AI is how we operate on day to day. And we see that in the decline of SEO. People are no longer going directly to Google. They're opening up ChatGPT or Perplexity or, Claude. They're using these tools to solve complex problems and to solve complex questions that would typically be a multiple threaded search within Google or Bing or whatever the search engines were of the day. So we think about AI and the prolific conversations in market within that SaaS business. It doesn't change how we go to market from brand. It still is connected to that emotional connection, that promise of what we are going to do, that authenticity, how we are going to solve that problem in their voice, and what does it mean to them. That doesn't change. I think the challenge is to present it in a language that educates and informs and provides that level of comfortability as they start to go from, I don't want to give up control, to AI is table stakes. And I think that's the transition that we're in right now. People want to understand that they have control and want to understand that those checks and balances are in place. And they want to embrace AI, and they think they know what it is. We're beyond the promise point, but we need to show how it works. What is that value? What friction does it remove? What does it solve for you day to day? Because it's more than just a search. It's about how we are going to go from point A to point C and skip B altogether, right? And how do we do that?
Yeah. When it comes to that, do you think we're kind of, to use a sports analogy, do you think we're in the first inning of that transition or closer to the ninth inning?
I definitely think that we're closer to the fourth inning, right? Like we've probably finished our first beer and our first hot dog. We're ready to go get another round. We're getting like comfortable within our seats. And I think that we're ready for the next step. And again, I'm talking from a point of view where I've launched a couple of AI products across 2 different companies over the last few years, where I've seen this evolution where, a lot of what I did in early of 2024 is around education and showing like actual prompts that you can use to get information, like very, very early stages. And now it's about how we're showing AI that is part of their existing workflows, how we can solve those real day-to-day friction points of like, there's a mass amount of information. I just need to know the information that's very pertinent to me right now. So help me do that. And so I think that's where we're currently on. And so again, how do we tell that particular story that's very valuable to that audience? And how do you tell it in their language? And I think this kind of goes through that whole threaded conversation that we've had, which is, how do we use brand marketing and co-marketing with other logos to help tell that story in languages that we don't quite yet have the right to win? How do we really lean in on that brand promise and that cachet that the strong brand of our organization and our company holds? How do we ensure that we have that threaded conversation through all of our just different customer touchpoint journey? If they're coming to the website or engaging within LinkedIn or attending an event or meeting with our sales team, that we have that threaded conversation and that through line of story all the way through. So I think it's really important for us to embrace the standards, or maybe the foundation. Maybe it's like marketing foundation that never really goes away. But we really need to stay close to that.
Yeah. Given what you said about where we're at in the transition, I like that fourth inning analogy. Do you think it makes sense to focus on AI and educational content kind of at a product marketing level rather than a brand marketing level? Because we're going to be at table stakes pretty soon.
I don't know if it's like one or the other. It's it's the percentage of one or the other, maybe. Earlier today, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues around, how much of what we do is really about B2B marketing versus how much of what we need to do is B2AI marketing. If we think about what I need to do as an integrated campaign marketer and thinking about content, how are we creating content that fuels the LLMs? Right. So that's a lot of that performance percentage. And that really works well when we're working with product marketing and really showing how the product works and those how-to conversations and educational pieces. That really works there. But at the same time, nobody's going to go any further than that LLM if they land on our website and that brand doesn't show through. Again, that's that wrapper. When somebody then engages with our content, they want to make sure that they're really engaging with that brand promise again, that emotional connection. Like, how are we thinking through that? So I don't know if it's one or the other, but really about how we're connecting all of that together. And we may overinvest a little bit more in that product motion or that educational motion versus that brand motion. But we still need that brand motion to make that product motion really resonate. Yeah.
So there's a lot of noise in the market right now. And a big part of that is that, everyone declared the old B2B marketing playbook dead last year because it kind of was. And a lot of people, I think, are trying to plant a flag on what the new playbook should be now that there's no juice in writing about the old playbook being dead. Do you see like a most underused lever for actually helping a brand stand out that you can share?
I don't know if it's an underused lever, but I have observed an over rotation. I want to say that we're starting to come out of that over rotation. Probably started in, 2010, right? Going into like just before pandemic time, there was this high rotation of attribution. Like everything had to be tied to an attribution. And that was that old like B2B playbook. And we're coming out of that right now. And we're really embracing brand as a way to be the unifier, or maybe it's the fuel, right? It's the thing that people want to connect with. We've been through an amazing transformation over the last, 5 years as a human connection, that how we want to send and receive information has changed. There's a lot of fatigue in email. There's a lot of apathy of people, like cold calls. So more and more people are choosing to connect with that human-centric brand. And I think that it's really important for us to continue to have that. So I don't know if it's a lever that is missing so much is remembering the importance of brands and that human connection that allows for a lot of those other emotions to come together. So again, if I think about my role of making sure that we have that through line of that story, it doesn't do a dang thing unless I have brand with me along the way.
Yeah, it's really good. Your perspective makes a lot of sense given that you work in integrated marketing. I just love how you keep bringing it back. It's like, well, we got to think about the whole picture. I think that makes a ton of sense. So talking about, just switching gears to talk about the operational side of things a bit and how you lead your team. You've written about decentralization and scaling, and how this pertains to how teams organize and show up and work together and so on and so forth. How does that philosophy show up and influence in how you build your campaigns and how you lead your teams kind of day to day?
Yeah. I think it's really important to provide enough structure or the playbook for people to work within. And at the same time, make sure that there's plenty of flexibility for customization and insights to come through. And it's really hard as a leader to have that right balance of, here's the structure, here's a playbook, this is what we're going to go do this year, here's a goal that we're marching towards. I want everybody to rally behind this. But I don't want to stifle speed. I don't want to stifle innovation. I want to make sure that we're building in that level of flexibility so people are really bringing forward those intimate moments, those insights, those bright sparks that are really allowing us to do that optimization. Because we are in an age where there is email fatigue, because we're in an age where brand and human centricity is so critically important, we are evolving at a pace that is much faster than it was 4 years ago. B2B marketing is no longer this annual integrated plan. And in some ways, it's no longer the quarterly integrated plan. It is, here's the framework that we are going after, and we need to quickly iterate and deliver, quickly iterate and deliver, iterate and deliver. So how do you create that structure that we're still heading towards the common goal, really high level goal, while not taking away for that intimate and very smart innovation? And, a really good example of that is going back to a conversation I had earlier today with my colleague around feeding into LLMs. That really was born out of her own insights of seeing how we're starting to degrade our return on SEO, and how we're starting to see traffic move over into the AI space and the ChatGPT and Claude space. And so she did some analysis around YouTube. And I think YouTube is one of those last areas that kind of straddles both feeding into LLMs as well as also like traditional SEO. And so we're able to see some of that referral traffic as like early leading indicators about where things are going. And it was just such a smart conversation that allowed us to think about a test or a pilot that we can then learn and iterate. And it's because I've worked really hard to have that right balance of like, what's the structure, where are we working towards, and how are we meeting our quarterly goals or monthly goals or weekly goals, and also provide that space for that innovation and those insights.
You're speaking my language on one thing with the testing and learning and taking this iterative approach. And I've found that it's very easy to talk about that, and everyone will go like, yeah, I love testing and iterating, but it's a little bit harder to actually do that, right? Because it requires such a level of like rigor and discipline, and having those, I guess, workflows or people to actually find those insights and learn from them, and then make sure that makes its way into what you do next, versus like the next thing coming from someone else's hunch or area of interest. How do you think about actually leveraging those insights from what's working? And also, no one likes to talk about it, but some things fail, right? And that lesson of what didn't work can be really valuable as well. How do you bring that forward into the next campaign brief?
Yeah, I think it's really important. You touched on something there that I push on a lot with my team, which is like, what didn't work? We have to be the loudest people in the room for our failures, which is really hard for marketers. We're always great at showing the positive, showing how great we are, and like making sure that we're really pumping up the victory laps, so to speak, as far as how great marketing is. That's meaningless if we don't also have that balance as far as what didn't work, what didn't land. But we think about testing and innovation. I've seen it done a couple of different ways. I've worked within a very large organization where message testing could take an entire quarter for us to then refine on the following quarter's innovation and content strategy. And that is fine for a very large, well-established organization that is looking to shift across multiple years. And they have a recurring revenue that allows for enough space to have that long tail testing kind of motions. But I've also worked in organizations where we're going to work on speed versus perfection. It kind of comes with, like I talked about it earlier today, this like impossible triangle of, do you want it good? Do you want it fast? Or do you want it cheap? You can't have all three. Choose your two of the three. And so you kind of have to embrace that a little bit when you're in an organization that is maybe getting to your first billion or, starting that product 0 to 1. We don't have time for that long tail testing. So build that structure for iterative testing. Here's the 3 tests I'm going to do this quarter. Here's my hypothesis when I want to prove or disprove. This is when I'm going to do a checkpoint on where we're at midway. And this is when I'm going to do a finality and decision of where we go next. Like that's the structure and the rigor, and it's much tighter. And then we also have testing or insight-driven pieces that is even shorter than that, which is I'm just going to put these messages into market over the next 2 weeks. Whatever wins, wins. And that's going to be the ad that we're going to then drive for the remainder of that quarter. So maybe the answer is like, think about what your annual goal is, your quarterly goal is, or maybe even your monthly goal is, and how do you create enough space and go into it with some hypotheses and be confident about what you want to prove or disprove. And as leaders, it's important to celebrate not only the insights that are going to drive to a win, but also the insights that didn't win, because then we have something else to focus on. Then we can like really pivot. And I paused because I was thinking about I think it was like Thomas Edison. It took him 1,001 different tries to figure out how to create a light bulb, right? Well, in reality, he found 1,000 different ways of not to create the light bulb. And that's also incredibly important. And so we really need to embrace that and celebrate that of just that is a good insight. That didn't work. Love that. Let's go try, what's your next move? Don't get down on it, learn it, move on, and let's go test something else.
Oh, that's awesome. Really great perspective. And so when this is all working and all comes together, what does a truly great integrated campaign look like to you? And can you share a recent example you're proud of?
Gosh, I think when you have something in market where you start with a launch that then leads to an in-person moment, that then leads to articles that are spread across multiple services, that then leads to in-person pipeline progression events, that then leads to activation emails, that then leads to conversations with customer success. And along the way, we have the same conversation and the same theme and the same look and feel. That is really exciting to me. It's really, really easy to have changes along the way. It's like a game of telephone. We have this promise at launch, and then we start to meet with somebody in person. And along the way, the message sometimes degrades a little bit, or it might get lost in translation. But when it stays connected all the way through the customer's journey, that's a win for me. Because for me, it's again, an integrated marketer, it's my job to be the performance part, to live up to that brand promise. It's my job to make sure what we say to our customers is still embracing that emotional connection that the brand wants to deliver. And so when it all connects together and it delivers on that and really embraces that brand, that's what looks good to me.
So we have to ask you about metrics. It's one of our rules here. No, I'm kidding, obviously. But, when you're thinking about integrated brand campaigns, I imagine you're looking at a whole array of metrics. Which ones matter most to you and your team, and which ones do you maybe down prioritize because they can tend to be misleading?
That's a really good question. I don't want to discount any metric that the team is viewing to help drive their day-to-day decisions to align to that common goal. But what I do want to make sure is there is a difference between leading indicator metrics and ones that we are going to report on as KPIs that we own. So let's say that the KPI that we are owning is how are we converting that MQL to S1, which essentially is what is that handshake between what marketing does and how sales is actually creating pipeline. It's really important for us to think about all of those leading indicators that help us ensure that we are aligned to meet that common KPI. So we still want to make sure that we're looking at engagement. Engagement is important. Engagement is important by persona to make sure, are we hitting the persona that sales wants to talk to close the business? If we are, then I know that the message is right and the targeting is right. If we get from engagement to someone to do some kind of action, maybe instead of just looking at that ad, they're actually registering for a webinar or a virtual event, so to speak. Well, then I know that the message wasn't compelling enough for them to want to do something. and the message was timely enough that it resonates with a business challenge that they want to solve that particular day. So registration is still super, super important. And just like those other metrics, are they attending it? Did they raise their hand and want to talk to sales? Also super important. But all of them are leading indicators to let me know, am I on track to hit to that ultimate KPI that I'm in charge of, which is, what is that MQL to S1 conversion? Am I doing my job to make sure that sales has enough pipeline to win?
So zooming out a bit, how do you see the evolution of how brand and integrated campaigns work together playing out? Are there any big shifts that you're keeping an eye on?
I don't know if there's any big shifts, but there is always optimizations. And one of the optimizations that I am really, is very topical for me, and I alluded to this already, which is how to create the right structure, but also ensure that we have a lot of agility. We are in a fast moving space within B2B marketing, and that is so important for us to stay connected across those three major areas of marketing. We have product marketing, we have integrated or performance marketing, as well as we have like brand marketing. And those three groups have to remain super aligned. And it can be challenging within an organization to make sure that those hundreds and multi-hundreds of people are all still agreed as far as where we're headed forward. And we're doing it in a way that we have space for agile optimizations. And so what I've done or thinking about re-embracing recently is this idea of squads, not silos. And what this really means is it's so easy to get stuck in your own org chart. And this is what I do, this is what my team does, and this is what I deliver on. But really, you need to create those cross-functional squads. I need to solve a problem that is top of funnel. So I need this product person, I need this brand person, I need this comms person, and I need this performance marketer to have a conversation and make sure that we are all listening to those early indicators and the success or not success of those early indicators that would help drive to that common goal. And I think that's an area that is very much top of mind for me. So it's less about how are we embracing brand, but more about how are we working across all of those three areas to ensure that all of those areas are represented and we're moving at a pace that is agile and responsive to the business versus just siloed in our own motion.
So if we're talking 3 years from now and your team is really celebrating, some big wins, what would you be toasting to?
I would be toasting to a couple of different things. I think that I would be toasting to seeing that integrated conversation from brand to customer, and how all of those different touch points mapped and had the same look and feel and conversation throughout. And at the end of it, we have a customer that is now our advocate and telling our story on our behalf. Like that would be a huge win. I think it would be amazing for us to continue to connect that brand promise to the customer that is then telling that brand promise story for us. And I think that we spend a lot of time of getting to pipeline and getting to the numbers that we sometimes forget about that human element, which is ultimately that customer. And that is our biggest opportunity. The second thing that I would be celebrating in 3 years is this handcuff that we have to MQLs. I think that MQLs are a really strong measure of our ability to gain net new contacts. But I think that there's other ways for us to measure engagement success and intent and how that can then be delivered into a sales outbound motion. And I've worked at a number of different organizations that have varying degrees of sophistication in that particular motion. I think it really depends on two factors. What is the maturity of the product and market? What is the maturity of the marketing organization? And what is our ability to measure based off of the speed of our execution? And so given in 3 years about where we're at, if we can think less about MQLs and more about high intent customers and accounts that sales wants to talk to, that would be a big win for me.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's been interesting just kind of watching the debate and just the conversation around MQLs unfold on LinkedIn in particular. I think about that, like that gif of Michael Jackson eating the popcorn. Like that's how I imagine myself right now. Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's there's definitely no shortage of people willing to call out MQLs as an inferior unit of measure, but I don't think anyone's kind of solved the problem for what's next, right? If we throw it out, like what are we replacing it with? So I think maybe the approach is like, well, how do we add to it, right?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I don't want to sound like I'm dogging on MQLs at all. I think they're very important for us to have, but let's be real about what they're measuring. And how can we use MQLs combined with product intent and combined with web traffic, combined with content engagement that collectively would give us a score that would allow us to think about an account that is qualified for an outbound motion. I think that's interesting. And so it's really about how do we embrace more than just MQLs as a decider of opportunity. And it's also like balanced with like where the company is in motion. And if it's something like an early stage product and a smaller organization, MQLs may be the best thing for them to decide for them to take that action because the speed at which they are going to be selling is much faster as compared to, I'm going to call out a brand like the Microsofts of the world, right? That moves at a much different pace. That, thinking about collective intent would be a much broader, a much stronger way for them to measure that marketing.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good take. Well, Deanna, we're almost at time. It's been awesome having you on. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you're super excited about that you want to, and you can give a shout out to?
There's a lot of things that we're working on. One of the things that I'm incredibly proud of is reinventing our content strategy team. We initially built our team to think about long tail content or more core versus derivative content. And we're really now engaging around like, how do we break that model? How do we think about pockets or pods that is thinking across both the customer journey as well as the content that feeds that particular journey? So I think it's less about a brand activation and for me, more about building an agile structure that is responsive to the business for us to continue to deliver that strong touch point across the entire customer journey, but do it at a speed that resonates and is more agile and needs to the business.
Very cool. Deanna, for people that want to learn more about you and find you online and maybe follow you, where's the best place for them to do so?
LinkedIn is the best place. You can search for me, Deanna Adams. I'm always open for a strong conversation or debate on MQLs. Happy to go there. So feel free to reach out and we can certainly get connected.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.